Okay, hi everyone. It is 8:03, so we should go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for logging on tonight. My name is Elizabeth. I am an Oceans Associate with Environment America Research and Policy Center. We are a nationwide nonprofit whose goal is to protect clean air, clean water, and open spaces. We investigate problems, craft solutions, and help the public make their voices heard in local, state, and national debates over the quality of our environment and of our lives. Thanks again for joining us tonight for a webinar on New York's ocean wonder, Hudson Canyon. We will begin tonight's program with an overview of what Hudson Canyon is from a New York high school student, Bryn Heller, who also works as a discovery guide leader at the New York Aquarium, to share why Hudson is so special to her and what she's doing to protect it. Then you'll hear from Mary Cammey, director of the New York Seascapes program, discuss some of the ocean science and ecological significance of Hudson and some of the marine life that call it home. Finally, the New York Seascape Assistant Director, Noah Chesnin, will discuss the policy tools that we have to protect this amazing ocean place and where it is in the process of becoming protected, as well as what you can do about it. And at the end, you'll have the opportunity to ask these speakers any questions that you may have. You can do this by typing your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll answer them in the order received. But before we dive into the panel portion of the evening, I want to share with you an experience that inspired me to want to learn more about New York's ocean wonder. I grew up in Rhode Island, which is known as the Ocean State for its long stretches of Atlantic coastline and its easy access to the beach. But this summer, I visited some of New York's beaches in Long Island and out in the Hamptons for the first time ever, and I was absolutely amazed. I was in awe of how crystal clear the waters were, and I can still feel the really strong ocean breeze just like blowing through my hair and hear the cathartic sound of waves lapping on shore. And my friends and I spent our last weekend of the summer at White Sands Beach out in Montauk. And I remember standing with my toes in the sand at the water's edge for what felt like hours, just staring at the ocean waves and gazing out beyond the Atlantic in awe and with curiosity about all of the life that our ocean supports. And little did I know that when I stood out on the beach that day, that like about 100 miles offshore, there was a canyon bigger than any I'd experienced in New England, a place home to whales, sea turtles, and deep sea coral. This canyon too was part of the seascape that my friends and I enjoyed. So it's safe to say that New York's beaches did not disappoint. That's why I'm hopeful to see so many of you here tonight. The more people who hear about this amazing ocean place off of New York and New Jersey's coasts, the better we'll be able to push decision makers to take bold actions to protect it. So now I will turn it over to Bryn to give a brief introduction of herself, and I'll play a brief video to talk more about what Hudson is and what inspired her to want to protect it.
Hi, I'm Bryn. I'm a Girl Scout from New York City and a Discovery Guide leader at the New York Aquarium. And I learned about the Hudson Canyon pretty recently. I had no idea that there was such a biodiverse canyon located right near my home. And when I talked to people about the Hudson Canyon, almost no one knew what I was talking about. As I began to research further, I started to learn about some of the problems the canyon faces, such as how oil, gas, and mineral exploration and development are subject to the president and administration's policies and federal legislation, and the Hudson Canyon has no permanent protection from these practices. I decided to research solutions. I learned more about the National Marine Sanctuary nomination package, which proposes that there would be no offshore exploration or drilling in the Hudson Canyon, which would not only protect aquatic life and corals from the oil and gas and machinery, but also from the loud noises caused by exploration and construction. Offshore drilling projects can impact the feeding, migration, and breeding behaviors of whales and other animals, but a national marine sanctuary designation that proposes no oil, gas, and mineral exploration and development in the Hudson Canyon would be a permanent solution. The Hudson Canyon has not yet received its National Marine Sanctuary designation, but we can change that. All of us here can help protect the Hudson Canyon. If people knew about the Hudson Canyon and they demonstrated their interest in having it protected as a National Marine Sanctuary, the federal government would be encouraged to protect it. We can all do our part. I made a YouTube video to spread the word about the Hudson Canyon and a petition for people to sign to help bring about change. If you want to sign the petition, it will be in the chat, or you can go to change.org and type in Protect Hudson Canyon, and it should come up. The Hudson Canyon is located close to where I live, but that doesn't mean that protecting it is only a New York City concern, or a New York State concern, or an East Coast concern. The Hudson Canyon relates to all of us. It affects each of us on a daily basis, and each one of us can help protect it. Thank you. I'm Brent. I'm a Girl Scout and a Discovery Guide leader at the New York Aquarium, and I'm from New York City. I've lived here my whole life, yet I only recently learned about the Hudson Canyon, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. Many people don't know about the Hudson Canyon, which is one of the world's largest underwater canyons. Located off the Atlantic coast, approximately 100 miles from the Statue of Liberty, the Hudson Canyon is 350 miles long and 10,500 feet below sea level at its deepest. The Hudson Canyon is home to many animals, some of which are threatened or endangered. Squid, crabs, flounder, tilefish, and tuna are fished for at the canyon's edge. Over 200 species of fish, 115 species of invertebrates, 17 marine mammals, 3 or 4 sea turtles, and 20 seabirds, and various deep sea corals, such as sea pens and stony corals, have been identified in the Hudson Canyon. Because the Hudson Canyon has such diverse aquatic life, it was nominated as a National Marine Sanctuary. So what does a National Marine Sanctuary designation mean? According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, the National Marine Sanctuaries Act allows NOAA to identify, designate, and protect areas of the marine and Great Lakes environment with special national significance due to their conservation, recreational, ecological, historical, scientific, cultural, archaeological, educational, or aesthetic qualities as national marine sanctuaries. I care about the Hudson Canyon because I live in New York City and I love conservation, the ocean, and aquatic life. I want to help conserve the Hudson Canyon because of its biodiversity and endangered species. So how does the Hudson Canyon relate to you? Maybe you also live in New York or love the ocean or conservation. If not, do you like seafood? The largest calamari fishery in New York is at the edge of the canyon. Do you enjoy using the internet? New York's deep sea cables are located around the Hudson Canyon. Do you like science? You might remember from science class that an ecosystem depends on all of its organisms to remain in homeostasis. If species are no longer able to live in the Hudson Canyon, the surrounding ecological communities would be affected too. Or perhaps you want to protect the Hudson Canyon for future generations. So how would a National Marine Sanctuary designation affect the Hudson Canyon? The Hudson Canyon's National Marine Sanctuary designation could help to permanently protect the Hudson Canyon from offshore oil, gas, and mineral exploration and development. Oil, gas, and mineral exploration and development are subject to the President and administration's policies and federal legislation, and the Hudson Canyon has no permanent protection from these practices. The nomination package proposes that there be no offshore exploration or drilling in the Hudson Canyon, which would not only protect aquatic life and corals from the oil and gas and machinery, but also from the loud noises caused by exploration and construction. Offshore drilling projects could impact the feeding, migration, and breeding behaviors of whales and other animals. A National Marine Sanctuary designation that proposes no oil, gas, and mineral exploration and development in the Hudson Canyon would be a permanent solution. If NOAA were to designate the Hudson Canyon as a National Marine Sanctuary, this would increase federal investment in scientific research and also supports STEM programs for students. Other sanctuaries have local educational programming tailored toward the sanctuary for students. So what happened with the nomination? The nomination was submitted in 2016, and NOAA determined that the Hudson Canyon is a place of national significance worthy of consideration as a national marine sanctuary. NOAA then placed the nomination in the sanctuary inventory and will conduct a 5-year review to determine whether to keep it in the inventory. So what can you do to help the Hudson Canyon? If you want to support the conservation of the Hudson Canyon, ask NOAA or the Biden administration to initiate a designation process. If people knew about the Hudson Canyon and they demonstrated their interest in having it protected as a national marine sanctuary, the federal government would be encouraged to protect it. People can demonstrate their interest by learning more about the Hudson Canyon, by spreading the word, such as by sharing this video, and by reaching out to government leaders about designating the Hudson Canyon as a national marine sanctuary. This can mean you, your family, friends, and anyone else you know making handwritten letters, poems, songs, stories, movies, dances, artwork, or videos aimed at protecting the Hudson Canyon, or anything else you can think of to demonstrate that people want the Hudson Canyon designated as a national marine sanctuary. Or you can sign my petition, and I will submit it to the NOAA Sanctuary Program. You can help protect the Hudson Canyon.
All right, thank you, Bryn, for that video overview on Hudson. And just so folks know, I will be sending a follow-up email with this video and a link to Bryn's petition if you don't catch it in the chat now. But yeah, we know that many people have never even heard of this incredible ocean place. So I would love to know a little bit more about if you remember the first time that you actually learned about Hudson Canyon and what specifically inspired you to want to take more action after you heard about it.
So I heard about the Hudson Canyon around 2 years ago, and it was something that it had never come up before. I had never heard about it, but I actually did hear about it from a presentation NOAA gave when I was a Discovery Guide my first season. And we heard about the Hudson Canyon, and we all found it so inspiring. So we decided we were going to collaborate to make an activity to teach New York Aquarium visitors about it. And it focused on where the canyon was, which animals live there, and the need to protect it. And I had so much fun learning about it that I decided I wanted to learn more about it. So I reached out to NOAA, and he's been my advisor ever since. And now I'm here.
That is awesome. I love that. Thanks so much for sharing, Bryn. All right, so next we will hear from Mary to paint a picture of New York Seascape and describe some of the ocean science and marine life out in Hudson Canyon. Oops, okay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Environment America, for inviting us to come and speak tonight and tell you about this most amazing place that's right here in my own backyard. And also, Bryn, thank you. It's so nice to see such an engaged and bright teenager supporting this kind of work. And you were so thorough. I'm not sure how much I'm going to add right now to the discussion. But thank you for that great little video and for sharing it broadly with the public. So I am the director of the New York Seascape program. The New York Seascape program is the marine conservation initiative of the New York Aquarium, which is part of the Wildlife Conservation Society. And for those of you who are familiar with New York, you may be familiar with our flagship park, which is the Bronx Zoo, but we also oversee 3 other zoos in New York City, as well as the New York Aquarium in Brooklyn. And that's up in the right-hand corner. It's a rendition of one of our newest ocean exhibits, which tells you all about Hudson Canyon and the sharks and the marine life in New York. And so New York, we do marine conservation in 23 countries around the world. And we've been based in New York City since 1895. And yet it wasn't until about 2010 that the Wildlife Conservation Society decided, maybe we can be doing marine conservation right here in our own backyard. And that's where I got involved. And that's when they decided to establish the New York Seascape program. So next slide. And so the New York Seascape program is our program, and what we call this, you can see a map here of sort of our turf, or surf as I like to call it. It's the area between Montauk, New York and Cape May, New Jersey, all the way from our tidal rivers and out to the edge of the continental shelf. So it's about 25,000 square miles, and also Long Island Sound. All right, so it's a very large area. Absolutely an amazing place. And the program was established to try to address some of the major conservation issues facing marine wildlife here in these waters. Next slide. And so our program, New York Seascape program, and Noah will tell you more about it. He's one of our members of our small team. As with everything with WCS, we're very focused on strong science-based conservation. So we've made a major commitment to doing research and to discover and protect the local biodiversity here. We institute lots of different kinds of policy initiatives to help restore threatened and depleted species, and then to protect the habitat that they depend on. And to do this, we do a lot of education outreach, both within the aquarium and our zoos, to our visitors. We get over 4 million visitors a year, at least pre-pandemic, in our various parks, as well as a lot of conservation outreach beyond the walls of our aquarium and zoos, like, for example, speaking with you this evening, to help build an ethic in New York that really is focused on stewardship and protecting the resources that are here. So we work through research, policy, and education, and we'll tell you a little bit more about the policy later that we do. Noah will speak to that, and I can tell you a little bit more about some of our field research. Next slide. But when most people think about New York and New York City, they think about an urban setting. They think about active development, a lot of activity in our waters, certainly the case. But as I always like to say, if we actually could peel back the surface of the ocean, I think almost everybody, New Yorkers and anyone in the world, would probably be absolutely astounded by how much wildlife we have here. And you can see just a list of some of the biodiversity. It includes many hundreds of species of fishes, many sharks, skates, and rays, 4 and 5 of the world's 7 sea turtles, seals, lots of marine animals. Some of them are the fastest animals in the world, the oldest animals on the planet, like horseshoe crabs and sharks. Some of them are the most endangered, like the North Atlantic right whale. It's really an amazing place, and very few people actually understand or are familiar with our wildlife. So that's part of our job, is to share this with them. Next slide. Now, one of the reasons why we have so much wildlife here is because of the habitats, diversity of habitats. And you might think that maybe I put the wrong slide in here. And if I were in the room with you and I asked you guys, how many of you recognize this habitat? I bet most of you would know that this is the Grand Canyon, right? But next slide. If I told you that we have something that rivals the size and the grandeur and the diversity of the Grand Canyon right here in New York, most people would have no idea, as Elizabeth and Bryn have already indicated. We do have a canyon of that magnitude, but it's buried beneath the ocean, about 80 miles from the Statue of Liberty. And so what you see here is a map of the New York Seascape. Now, this is a wall map that we did in conjunction with the National Geographic, and to depict how much wildlife, but also how busy our local waters. And in the red circle there is sort of the footprint of our Grand Canyon, the Hudson Canyon. You can see that it is the drowned riverbed, actually, of the Hudson River, which originates north of New York City and extends across the entire continental shelf, about 80 or 100 miles, to the the head of the canyon, which is about 80 meters below the surface, and then extends another 350 miles offshore. Next slide. So what is a submarine canyon? Well, in most cases, it's basically a very deep and steep valley that's buried underwater, just like similar to the Grand Canyon, but ours is way beneath the waves. And it actually incises the edge of the continental shelf and heads out over the slope and all the way out, very far out to the deep sea. All right. And in these canyons, you have a lot of interesting structure and a lot of currents that actually help to bring nutrients up from the bottom. Many of these nutrients have been deposited through the Hudson River and down into the canyon for millennia. And those nutrients coming up into the upper reaches of the canyon create for a very productive ecosystem. And that's part of the reason why these areas are so full of life and why they're ecological hotspots. So on the right-hand side, you will see that we don't have the only canyon here in the US or on the Atlantic seaboard. There are actually 14 canyons and a number of seamounts that dot the entire Atlantic seaboard. And this is true of coasts all around the world. But the Hudson Canyon is by far the largest submarine canyon along the Atlantic coast. And I can tell you a little bit more in just a moment. Keep to go next slide. And so here's just some of the interesting factoids about the Hudson Canyon. As I mentioned, it starts about 100 miles from New York City and then extends 350 miles out to sea. It can be up to over 7 miles wide at its largest point and can reach thousands of feet deep and go way, and the walls are like almost a mile deep and extend very far offshore. All right. It is a place that is very important to seasonal migrant of species. And if you want to go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about why it's such an important biological hotspot. These are just some of the creatures that we would find in the canyon. As Bryn was saying, there are hundreds of species of fish. I think maybe more than 200 species of fish, dozens of species of cetaceans and dolphins that use the canyon, 200 species of invertebrates, dozens of species of seabirds. It is an ecological hotspot that really is deserving of a lot more research and conservation effort than it receives. Now, we are just learning about this place, but actually back in 1925, was what the time was first explored by, maybe some of you have heard of William Beebe, who went down, took the deepest dive into the canyons and into the ocean in their bathysphere. And that bathysphere is actually now at the New York Aquarium. If any of you get to come and visit us at some point in time, you can see the original bathysphere. In 1925, William Beebe actually spent a few days exploring this, and he called it the Hudson Gorge. And at that time, he also was astounded about the amount of wildlife that was actually off one of the largest metropolitan areas in the world. And he started to write about it and have artists draw about it. At that point in time, there were 35 articles written in the New York Times about the Hudson Gorge. And I would dare say that probably more people in the 1920s knew about this amazing place than probably the number of people, a proportion of people who do today. So we are still exploring it, and it is absolutely a critical place for us to try to protect. Next slide. But beyond being an ecological research, or maybe because it's an ecological hotspot, it is of tremendous value to a number of different stakeholders. And there are a lot of activities that take place on, within, or across the canyon. So shipping is, many vessels move across the canyon and at the surface, and at the bottom, there are lots of cables that actually connect New York and this very important metropolitan area with the rest of the world. Transatlantic cables that allow us to do exactly what we're doing now, talk to each other through the internet. It is very important for commercial fisheries, targeting things like tunas, swordfish, lots of Squid are amazingly important. It's the largest fishery that takes place in the canyon. And then it's also a mecca for large game anglers who go out to these waters to target sharks and to catch large tunas like bluefin and yellowfin and big-eye tuna, swordfish, etc. So it's important to the angling community. And then also as an ecotourism hotspot, there are a lot of trips that go out there to look at pelagic birds, and also to many of the marine mammals like sperm whales and bottlenose dolphins and Rizzo dolphins, et cetera, that ply the waters and depend on it as at least a part of the year as an important habitat. Next slide. And with all of these important uses also come threats such as pollution. There's plastic pollution that's been found at the bottom of the canyon. One of the things I failed to mention is the importance of the canyon in terms of as a coral habitat. So if you guys think of coral ecosystems, you often think of reef systems in warm tropical waters. Well, we have our own coral habitats and communities buried deep at the bottom and the walls of the canyon. That are really important habitat for other species. And these deep water corals, we can talk about some more, have been at least protected for the time being from destructive fishing activities. But other activities that have taken place out there, fishing activities are managed, but can have consequences. There is important sources of methane and oil and gas that have maybe exploited, have not yet been, but could be. And there's also the potential for other kinds of extraction and renewable uses of those waters. So with all these overlapping uses and wildlife, as a Wildlife Conservation Society, we've decided that this is really an important place for us in our backyard to help protect. Next slide. And we have been doing that now for a number of years, mostly through outreach to the public, and in the hopes that we actually maybe can establish a national marine sanctuary here right in our own backyard. It would be the only one in this area. And it would help us to do all the things that Bryn mentioned to bring a lot of resources, attention, and conservation action to this absolutely amazing, ecologically important spot. And Noah now is going to tell you a little bit more about those actions that we've been taking in the past few years. So I pass it off to Noah.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Elizabeth and Environment America. As they've noted, my name is Noah, which in this world can be a source of either some silly jokes or some confusion. And hopefully we'll keep what we're talking about in terms of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration separate from what I personally am doing. So if you can move to the next slide. I want to show, this is the National Marine Sanctuary Network that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that NOAA has established. You can see a network of 15 sites. These are important sites, as we've heard this evening, that are important for a variety of reasons, for ecological reasons, for recreational uses, for cultural uses, for commercial uses. And what you can see in the region closest to New York and New Jersey is that there currently is no sanctuary. The site closest to us in the ocean is off of Massachusetts in Stellwagen Bank, and then further to the south of us in the Chesapeake Bay, the Mallows Bay, Potomac River National Marine Sanctuary. Next slide. So in 2014, during the Obama administration, NOAA established a community-based nomination process to solicit new ideas for where new sanctuaries could be designated. As you can see on the left, the general criteria that NOAA was and is currently looking for relate to a variety of potential issues, the natural and ecological values, the historic and cultural significance, the economic value, but also how it's tied to the public and the public benefits. So for example, whether that's research and then sharing out information, new marine science research, but also education and community engagement as a way to connect people to the sanctuary in their backyard. In 2016, we submitted a nomination and we really looked at 4 primary goals. And so you've heard a little bit about them. I'll sort of walk through them a little bit and then talk about where we are in the process. But obviously we have, we're seeking a long-term conservation outcomes, but we're also seeking to balance sustainable use and conservation, and increase federal investment in scientific research and monitoring, and really connect Hudson Canyon to the residents of New York, New Jersey, and the Mid-Atlantic and New England, but also to people around the country. And you can see in the slide, the map here, it's smaller, but that red line is our proposed initial boundary for discussion, with a black internal boundary that shows the deep sea coral protection areas that the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council established in 2016. Next slide. So we submitted the nomination in 2016 in November, and as I'm sure you all remember, there was a lot going on that month. And we really make the case for why Hudson is important. The case, as Mary and Bryn have discussed earlier. And then next slide. And we are seeking several really important conservation as well as other goals for this nomination. As both Bryn and Mary have noted, there's a historic legacy, as the map on the left shows, for oil and gas exploration. That's a map from the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s, that shows test drilling sites to the south and west of the canyon. You can see those cut marks, those incision marks, as Mary noted, into the shelf break. On the right-hand side is a map that shows the deep sea methane vents and seeps. There are 50 that were documented in a research paper, a scientific research paper back in 2014. And these seeps create really cool communities of invertebrates and other species that rely on the methane as their source of energy. So they don't rely on sunlight or other sources of as the primary source of energy. So we know that there's a potential resource that could be extracted, and as you've heard, one of the sort of permanent and long-term benefits we seek is to permanently close Hudson and the area around Hudson to oil and gas and mineral exploration and development. Next slide. As Mary noted, there are a lot of important uses in our oceans, and it's a busy place off of New York and New Jersey. And the sanctuary program strives to balance sustainable use and conservation. And given the important role of connecting people, whether through their plate or their binoculars, to our ocean habitats, we have recommended that recreational and commercial fishing continue to be regulated by the existing authorities, that the sanctuary, if it were designated, would help supplement with research with the fishing community to inform those management decisions, would help with monitoring and ensure that the fishery regulations are enforced. We also know, as Mary noted, that shipping is an important issue. One of the shipping lanes leading into New York, the port of New York and New Jersey, starts in landward of where we've proposed, and that the sanctuary would help invest in perhaps monitoring of marine mammals, sharing that information with the Coast Guard and with mariners to help reduce the risk of ship strikes and vessel strikes. Next slide. Mary mentioned the bathysphere that William Beebe and others use to explore deep sea environments around the world. This is the actual submersible that they used in the 1920s, and you can see it at the entrance to the aquarium. The point we're making here is that sanctuaries are a way to increase federal investment, not just from the sanctuary program, but from other federal agencies in research and monitoring. There's a lot we still don't know, and that this type of demonstration of the significance of Hudson Canyon will lead to a better understanding and also educational opportunities. And that's really the focus of the next slide. So as I mentioned, up off of Massachusetts is the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. And this is just a screenshot of their website showing the resources that the Sanctuary program prepares for teachers and students, naturalists, and interested, curious residents of all ages, translating the research that's happening in the sanctuary, translating the information for the public, and spurring STEM jobs and STEM careers. And as a part of our mission as a public-facing aquarium, obviously we want to support increased education and outreach. We also see a sanctuary designation as a way to drive ecological and biological monitoring roles and jobs in our region to support healthy oceans and sustainable use. So it's both for schools, but also for aspiring career professionals as well. Next slide. So we submitted the nomination in 2016, and this is the array of supporters we were able to generate, and we've continued to build, expanded our support. And so we're excited to talk to you today about generating more support for the nomination and for designation. Next slide. So you may be asking, what is the nomination process? What is the designation process? This is sort of a detailed slide that goes through the multi-step process to get us from submitting the nomination in November of 2016. And then after the election, and even after Trump was inaugurated, the agency staff at NOAA conducted a review. They determined that the nomination met their criteria. And they moved the nomination into the sanctuary inventory, as Bryn noted. That is basically a site, basically a bookshelf where ideas for new sanctuaries can reside, and they can stay there for 5 years. So as you can see, NOAA moved the sanctuary nomination for Hudson Canyon into the inventory in February of 2017. And we're expecting the agency to conduct a 5-year review process where they would ask members of the public for input and support, but also new information about the nomination and about Hudson Canyon. And so that's why we're excited to talk to you today. Next slide. So as a part of this process for 5 years of review, we want to ask NOAA and the National Marine Sanctuary Program to initiate the designation process. And that's really our key ask at the moment. And if they were to do this, that would really tee up a multi-year process, a really deliberative, slow, and sort of engaging process to listen to the public, listen to stakeholders, whether it's the state governments, local governments, tribal governments, to build consensus around what the designation would look like, what the area would be, what uses would be regulated, and then to have public comment periods sprinkled throughout that multi-year process. So we are sort of poised to have an opportunity to really push for this, and we would love your support. Next slide. So what can that look like right now? Obviously, as Bryn noted, it's really important to learn more about Hudson and share the information with your friends and family and your community, to sign the petition that Bryn has developed, and then also to stay involved with the Ocean Campaign, and when we have that public comment period, to submit a public comment in support of the nomination, asking for a designation. So with that, I think we're going to pivot now to a Q&A period, and we really welcome all your input and questions, and we hopefully can build on this exciting moment into the future. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much to our 3 panelists for those overviews, and we will jump right into our Q&A portion of tonight. And we have a number of questions coming in. And one of the first ones that I want to ask from Jeff and Robert Currently, is there any drilling or mining in this area? And are there any companies interested in development? I don't know if Noah or Mary knows the answer to this.
Noah, go ahead.
Sure. So the initial test drilling sites in the map that I showed were from the late 70s and 80s. And there hasn't been any test drilling recently, but during the last administration, there was an effort to expand oil and gas and mineral exploration off the Atlantic, including up to basically the southern edge of the region that we're talking about off of New Jersey. And we know that threat can evolve with administrations prioritizing that or not. Under the current administration, we don't see that as an immediate threat, but the protections that are afforded right now are not did not cover the whole canyon and are not necessarily permanent. There have been lawsuits in the past, and there could be future lawsuits as well, depending on the administration.
Great, thanks. And another good question from Judith is, are there any dive trips that go there?
I don't know, Mary, if you want to cover this one or?
Yeah, I can cover this. So most of the canyon is far offshore and very deep. And most of the resources that you would be able to see are probably deeper than the ability of most scuba divers, right? We're talking things as, starting hundreds of meters below the surface. And so it is not really a major dive destination. There are a number of shipwrecks that might be of interest to divers, but they are also very deep. There are 4 shipwrecks within our proposed boundaries. One that may be most famous of people who go out there to fish would be the Texas Tower, but even that is probably too deep to dive. And the unfortunate thing is that because the canyon's buried so deep, we have very few visuals of the canyon walls, et cetera, except for the fact that in the last couple of years, NOAA has been, not our NOAA, but NOAA, the agency, has been doing deep submarine dives down there and actually has produced some amazing video and visuals of life in the canyon, which Bryn was able to include in her video because they are actually accessible by the public. So I would encourage you to go to NOAA's website, look at their Ocean Explorer page and learn more about it and get a sense of life there.
Yeah, and on that note, a question from Ella asks, are there any current coral restoration projects focusing on Hudson Canyon that you know of?
So I alluded to it briefly, but the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council established a deep sea coral protection zone in Hudson Canyon in 2016 in part of the canyon. And that restricts some of the fishing activity that could impact deep sea corals, which are slow growing, long-lived, and very fragile. The depth of the population is such that there's no similar sort of restoration effort to what we might see, say, off the Florida Keys or in other parts of the world. But the management measures, those fishery management measures, are hopefully helping protect the corals themselves.
Great, thanks. And a question that came in from Julie, and I'm sure is a question that's on a lot of people's minds, is why does this process take so long?
So I would actually say that as we were looking at ways to help protect Hudson Canyon, one of the appealing parts of it was of a sanctuary both nomination and designation process is multiple chances for public participation, for stakeholder engagement. As an aquarium, and Mary alluded to this, described this, we're trying to build opportunities for public engagement and for helping inform the decisions. So while slow, that in many ways, that's the democratic process that we are striving to foster. And so it provides many footholds along several years for members of the public to be engaged.
Yeah, and similarly, another question that came in along those lines is like, who would oppose its designation as a sanctuary?
Well, I can speak a little bit to that. I think, you know, there is really quite widespread support for sanctuary nomination, but for those who use the canyon the most, I would say, would be the fishing community, the commercial and recreational fishing community. And they are, you know, it's an important destination. I think somebody asked a question about how valuable are those fisheries, how much fishing takes place out there. And there are quite a few very, very important fisheries to New York from a commercial perspective. For example, the squid fishery, squid fishery, the summer flounder, porgy, butterfish, tilefish, tunas. These are all very important commercial fisheries. And then for recreational, I mentioned also that it's a very important place to anglers who like to chase after sharks and billfish and tunas. And so I think probably that's where we are finding the most resistance. Now, as Noah mentioned, we as WCS support fisheries that are well managed there. And because the current council and other management authorities have been doing a pretty good job managing fisheries, we believe that they should maintain that authority and, you know, help maintain the economic value of the sanctuary, which is, again, it's a multiple use, as well as the ecological value.
Great, thanks for answering a couple of those questions there. And then another question that came in from Jeff and Dave, and this is for Noah. Have you gotten support from New York's congressional delegation, like Representative Ocasio-Cortez?
So we have, and in our nomination package, we were able to generate support from members of the New York delegation. Obviously, this was, I think this was before Representative Ocasio-Cortez was elected, so she was not one of the supporters, but we are in the process of talking to members of Congress and seeking their support, and certainly reaching out to her office as well. And that is exactly right. That's an astute question, and I think a way where members of the ocean conservation community here can help and generate support by letting their members of Congress know that this is important to you and that it's, you know, something that you would ask them to support as well.
Great, thanks. And then another interesting question, which might be for Mary. What does the future look like for this area's ecosystem if this designation doesn't end up happening, and like how would community members and wildlife be affected?
Well, we certainly hope that we're able to get these protections in place. If it's not done through a sanctuary nomination, we certainly would like to ensure that the administration restricts oil and gas development, you know, in these waters in the mid-Atlantic. They are ecologically important, economically super important. We don't want, you know, oil spills here in our own backyard. And there, you know, we will continue to push NOAA to do research. We will continue to push the fisheries management councils to manage the resources out there sustainably. And so I think there are a tremendous amount of benefits to it. And there are a lot of questions about the canyon that yet need to be explored. For example, what role might the canyon play with climate change? You know, how are species that are shifting north now because of warming waters? How will the canyon help to support them or change them? Is it kind of be an ecological refugia in the light of climate change? So there are a lot of questions to be had, and hopefully, you know, we won't stop protecting it and studying it.
Yeah, great point. And it illustrates why we need this designation to have funding for more research and answer those really important questions. And another interesting question that I kind of think piggybacks off of what you were just talking about from Julie is, like, is there a danger of overfishing in the canyon, and like how to balance the ecological versus economic resources that we get from this amazing ocean place?
I think without management, there is always a danger of overfishing. And so an interesting fact about our local waters is as busy and as heavily used that they have been over the centuries. Our research has shown that although populations have been depleted, we have not documented any extirpation or any extinction of any local species. So what this says to us is that with effective management, we can maintain wildlife here. What we would like to see is the wildlife being restored, and that requires protecting the habitats that they depend on, and also have management in place that restricts fishing, at least overfishing. We're not against fishing. We recognize the value and the importance of this from jobs, livelihoods, food, but we need to make sure that it's sustainable and well managed now and for the future.
Great, thanks for that. I think we have time for just about 2 more questions. I'm going to ask one question about marine mammals, and then I'll end with a question for Bryn. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the research that you do with marine mammals that live or depend on Hudson Canyon.
Okay, so I'm going to actually shift gears a little. We do research on marine mammals, less so in Hudson Canyon. But there is a lot of work that's being done, for example, by researchers in Stony Brook. But one thing that we are doing research on in Hudson Canyon is tagging sharks. So as I mentioned, sharks there are many species of deep water and pelagic sharks that use the canyon. And I don't know if you want to switch to that last image of there showing us tagging a shark in Hudson Canyon, but we are putting satellite tags on blue sharks and short fin mako sharks to look at their movements in and out of New York waters and how they depend on these deep sea ocean habitats. So in 2014, I think the track, if Elizabeth is able to show it, we were able to put a satellite tag in a shark off of a couple of satellite tags actually in sharks off of Long Island, and even one in the Hudson Canyon, and we're able to track its movements for a number of months up and down the whole edge of the continental shelf. And what we're finding is that these species heavily depend on these deep ocean currents, the amount of food it's an important food web that attracts species like big pelagic sharks and tunas. And here on the left, you can see that we actually tagged a mako shark with that tag that we put on its fin, been held by another one of our team members, Hans Walters, and we actually tracked it across the ocean for a number of months. Unfortunately, the track ended in the middle of the ocean, and as the fate has it, many of the sharks that we see in our waters end up at the end of a hook on a long line. And 25% of our pelagic sharks actually were caught by fishermen. And fortunately, they were kind enough to send us back the tag so they were able to recover the data and have a better understanding of the fate of some of these animals. But that's why we need fisheries management in place to make sure that some of these animals actually live to an age to reproduce and survive and keep these waters really vibrant.
Great, thanks for that. And then the final question I'll ask is for Bryn. And what is the message that you hope people take away from your work?
So I hope that people will want to learn more about the Hudson Canyon and tell their friends and family about it. It's important for people to feel connected to the Hudson Canyon since it is relevant to all of our lives. And I hope that people will feel inspired to protect it.
Lovely. What a great note to end our webinar tonight on. So we're just about at time. Thank you to all of our wonderful panelists and to all of you for joining us today. Like Bryn mentioned, if you want to take action to protect Hudson, you can sign her petition, and I think the link is in the chat there, and I'll also send a follow-up email with the link to that petition as well. And you can also sign up to be a Voice for Our Ocean, which is our program at Environment America for community leaders and activists that are working to protect our beaches and our coasts. And by signing up to be a Voice for Our Ocean, we'll be sure to keep you in the loop on ways that you can get involved to keep all of the amazing wildlife and ocean habitats of Hudson Canyon safe and healthy, and keep you updated on its process to be nominated as a National Marine Sanctuary. So with that said, looks like it is the end of our program. Thanks again to everyone for joining. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Happy to answer questions if people still have them.
Thank you.